Imagine a world where Brazilian footballer Socrates and Johan Cruyff, the Dutch footballing visionary, are resurrected and handed the keys to Manchester United. What would they do? How would they go about fixing a club that's been stumbling in the shadows of its former glory since Sir Alex Ferguson's departure? Now, this is just a whimsical thought experiment. It's a question that cuts to the heart of what makes football and leadership so fascinating. See, Socrates and Cruyff weren't just footballers, they were intellectual revolutionaries in many ways. They thought differently, acted boldly, and left indelible marks on the game. But before we dive into their hypothetical takeover of Manchester United, with one or both of them taking over as a kind of director of football, let's lay out 4 key questions that I will be answering in this video. Number 1, why are Socrates and Cruyff so highly regarded in football history as intellectuals? Number 2, what have been the biggest issues at Manchester United since Sir Alex Ferguson left? 3, what are the examples of inefficiencies at the club or things that could be improved? Number 4, what would a modern day Socrates or Cruyff do to transform Manchester United if they were given the role of a director of football? But before I go any further, if you want to check out any cheap, good quality football jerseys, go over to okjersey.com. They've got retro jerseys like this Manchester United home shirt from 1986 to 1988, and this 1990-92 away jersey from the League Cup final, both available for under $23. And they've also got a variety of new season and other retro jerseys from other club and international sides as well. They sent me over these alternative new season Manchester United jerseys, as well as this Manchester United home shirt from the 92-93 season with Cantona 7 on the back. If you use code Atlantis at checkout, you'll get a 10% discount, so I'll leave it linked in the description and in the comments section below. So Socrates wasn't just a footballer, he was a thinker, a doctor and a political activist. On the pitch, he captained Brazil's legendary 1982 World Cup team, a team that played with such flair and creativity that they are still celebrated till today, despite not actually winning the World Cup. But off the pitch, he was a vocal critic of Brazil's military dictatorship, using his platform to advocate for democracy. And that's because Socrates saw football as more than just a game. It was a microcosm of society. He believed in collective decision making, even letting his teammates vote on tactical decisions. His approach was revolutionary, blending intellect with artistry. Johan Cruyff, the prophet of total football. Cruyff was an architect of the game. As a player, he was the embodiment of total football, a system that emphasised fluidity, positional interchange and technical mastery. As a coach, he transformed Barcelona into a global powerhouse, laying the foundations for their so-called tiki-taka style. Cruyff's genius lay in his ability to see the game as a chessboard. He didn't just play football, he fought it. His famous quote, "Playing football is very simple, but playing simple football is the hardest thing there is," encapsulates his philosophy. Together, Socrates and Cruyff represent the marriage of intellect and innovation in football, but they aren't the only so-called football visionaries who throughout history have challenged the status quo. But we'll come on to that more later on in the video, but now we come on to what have been Manchester United's biggest issues since Sir Alex Ferguson left. So since Ferguson's retirement in 2013, Manchester United has been a club in crisis, or a club moving slowly towards crisis, almost now definitely in a crisis. And there are many issues. First of all, there's a lack of identity. See, under Ferguson, United had a clear identity, fast attacking football with a never say die attitude. Since his departure, the club has drifted aimlessly, cycling through different managers with conflicting philosophies. But another issue has been poor recruitment. United's transfer strategy has been a disaster. In that time period since Sir Alex left, they've spent over £1 billion on players, but many signings have failed to deliver. And with the club always prioritising commercial appeal over footballing needs, this has led to a bloated and unbalanced squad, which has led on to structural dysfunction. Unlike clubs like Manchester City or Liverpool, United has consistently lacked a coherent structure above. The manager often has too much power, or sometimes not enough power, which has led to a club with no clear long-term vision, which over the years has compiled to create a cultural decline. Ferguson's United were built on a culture of excellence and accountability, but since then the culture has been eroded and replaced by what a lot of people would call complacency and entitlement. But what are some examples of inefficiencies at the club or things that could be improved, and what would a modern day Socrates or Cruyff do to transform Manchester United? So back to the video, what are some examples of inefficiencies at the club or things that could be improved? So number 1, you've got the scouting and recruitment. Obviously, United's scouting network has been pretty outdated since Sir Alex Ferguson left, and maybe even whilst he was there. We've seen this by missing out on big talents like Erling Haaland and Jude Bellingham when they cost a minimal of the price they would eventually go for, instead splashing cash on marquee signings like Paul Pogba and Alexis Sanchez, who are big financial risks. And because we didn't recoup basically anything from those transfers, you'd have to say they failed to justify their price tags. But you've also got the youth development. The famed class of 92 was a testament to United's ability to nurture young talent. However, today the academy without doubt is underutilised. with very few graduates actually breaking into the first team, and often being held too long in the under-21s, going out on random loan moves, and then leaving for minimal fees anyway. We've also got the tactical inconsistency, which has happened over a long period of time, as each new manager brings a different tactical approach, leading to confusion and instability, and quite a substantial transition period between managers, because there's no continuity between the tactical identity at the club over the long term. We've also got a rather paradoxical one once you think of the financial situation that United are in, because there has been a degree of commercial overreach, as United's commercial success since Sir Alex Ferguson has left has often come at the expense of footballing priorities, with the club seemingly being focused more on selling shirts and winning trophies, which maybe isn't as true now, but it's definitely something that has hindered United over the last decade or so. So what would a modern day Socrates or a Johan Cruyff do to transform Manchester United? So Socrates would be a cultural rebuilder. I think the Brazilian would start by addressing the club's cultural decay. He would instill a sense of purpose and accountability, empowering both players and fans, for certain situations depending on the context obviously, to take ownership of their roles. And Socrates led by these two principles throughout his career. First of all, democratic decision making. Inspired by his time at Corinthians, Socrates might introduce a more collaborative approach, involving players' opinions more in terms of tactical discussions, training schedules, which overall could help to foster a sense of unity. He also believed in social responsibility, and he could use United's global platform to advocate for social causes, reconnecting the clubs with its community roots. And this is something that definitely has been an issue with Ineos's current ownership of United, with the austerity-like cuts definitely souring the relationship between Ineos and the United fan base. And this is going to be incredibly important over the next few seasons as United are looking to rebuild Old Trafford. Now I should say, I definitely don't think adopting a sole, fully democratic running of the club is the right answer, although I definitely think some aspects of Socrates' philosophy could be embraced. See, in general, I think football clubs, particularly the so-called super clubs like Manchester United are, in the modern era have to be run like multinational corporations, and the primary decision makers should be few but highly competent, with confidence in their long-term vision for the club. And this is where the role of a presidential figure like a Florentino Perez has its benefits over the structure that United currently have, where the decision making is a lot more thinly spread, amongst a multitude of people from Omar Barada, Jason Wilcox to Sir Jim Ratcliffe himself. But at United currently, it feels like there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and the Ineos vision has become blurred, with the key decision makers not on the same wavelength or following one set philosophy and strategy for running the club. And in theory, that's what you would have imagined Dan Ashworth was coming in to provide in the summer, but his influence was definitely watered down, as it seems like he left the club after disagreeing with the appointment of Ruben Amorim, which you could argue was right or wrong, but Dan Ashworth was the sporting director, which in simple terms is kind of like a director of football. But surely the sporting director is the one that has the most influence over who the next manager or head coach is. Dan Ashworth seemed to have a role, with the title being rather misleading to his actual influence and power over decision making. However, this is where the democratic ideas of Socrates could improve United's club functioning, not because the fan base would be voting on important decisions like who the manager or director of football is, but instead they could vote for a president who, like a political candidate running for office, is running off of his philosophy and principles, being a representative that the fan base wants running the club. You could have elections, say every 7 years for example, with people setting up their own campaigns before the paying members, let's say the season ticket holders for example, get to vote out of maybe 4 or 5 top candidates for who is going to run the club as essentially a president for the next 7 years. Now the reason I do say about 7 years is because you want a president in for a fairly long period so that they aren't as incentivised to prioritise the short term over the longer term. Now don't quote me on this because obviously some of my suggestions are a bit harder to navigate in practice, but you'd essentially have a few candidates running for president who would have a director of football in mind for who they want to appoint if they do win, who will then oversee the overall running of the football department from the head coach, the youth coaches, the head of recruitment, scouting department, etc, etc. Now someone who's currently at United who I actually think would make a good president would be Jean-Claude Blanc, and I'm planning to do a whole separate video on his role at the club, going through his past and explaining why I rate him so highly, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss out on that. But in a dream world for me, Jean-Claude Blanc would be the president with Luis Campos underneath him as the director of football. Now of course someone like Omar Barada, Jason Wilcox, or someone who currently isn't in the board structure like maybe a former player, or someone with connections to the club, could also run against Jean-Claude Blanc for that presidential position, from where they would then set out their own visions to the fan base with a director of football in mind, someone like Beppe Marotta, Ralph Rangnick, Paul Mitchell, whoever their chosen director of football is, coming in underneath them to run the football side of things. Now, of course, even though this is very rare, in an ideal world, the president would be someone with a high level of intellect both on and off the pitch, someone who understands where the game is evolving from a tactical and individual player point of view. And this is why I think someone like Johan Cruyff would have been perfect for this role. But if a modern day version of Johan Cruyff came into Manchester United as the president, or even as a director of football, what would he change? Well, Cruyff would overhaul United's playing style and structure, with the playing style being a more evolved and modern day adapted version of Total Football 2.0. He would implement a modern version of this way of playing, emphasising positional play, high pressing and technical excellence. Cruyff would also prioritise youth development, creating a pipeline of talent from the academy to the first team. And if he did come in as a president, he would establish a clear hierarchy with a director of football overseeing the long-term strategy, creating one of those European-style setups that we see at like Ajax or Bayern Munich to allow the head coach to focus on coaching, which is kind of similar to what United already have, but it would be a more efficient version closer to what we see with the European models, where it's not just like 6 guys in a room waffling about the next decision as it seems to be at United currently. Now, if I personally was in this presidential role, one of Luis Campos or Beppe Marotta would be my director of football. I'll do a separate video comparing the two in depth, but in short, both have impressed me with how they've been able to transform struggling sides into title winners within a short period of time just through a shrewd managerial appointment and a conservative but well thought out transfer strategy. If you do want to see what Campos did at Monaco or what Marotta did at Sampdoria, you can go over to my Patreon and get a 7-day free trial to read those articles. I'll also be uploading articles on Campos at Lille and PSG, as well as Marotta at Juventus and Inter Milan. But for the sake of the video, let's go with Luis Campos as my director of football, and he would be the main man, above even the head coach Amorim. And so he would be the one collaborating with the head coach in order to find the best players for the given roles in his system. As president, I would also allow Campos to oversee the youth recruitment, allowing him to appoint whoever he saw fit for this role. And the reason I think youth recruitment needs to be distinctly separate from the first team recruitment is because I think we need to be bringing in as many talented players between the ages of 16 and 20, preferably between 16 and 18, so that we can set up a multi-club network or build relationships with other clubs in foreign leagues to then send these players out on loan, develop them with a clear and patient plan over 2 to 4 years, before then bringing them into the first team as a ready-made and proven player or selling them along the way for profit to aid our PSL situation in the long term. Also, like Cruyff, I think United need to be implementing a coordinated tactical philosophy throughout the youth teams that relates to the system but more so the principles of the first team head coach. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the under-21s and under-18s have to be playing a 3-4-3 with exactly the same patterns of play as Amorim's first team, but I think all youth players should at least be coached in this sort of system so that they are at least familiar with the system when they come into the first team. But I also think that all youth players should be coached with these 3 principles. Number 1, versatility. Each player from the under-18s should be coached and regularly play in 3 different positions. For example, Goodwill Kokonki could be coached as a centre-back primarily, but also as a left-back, left wing-back or a central midfielder. Harry Amas the same. Chido Obi Martin's primary position is going to be as a centre-forward, but he could also be used as a winger and an advanced central midfielder. Amir Ibrahimov mainly as a central midfielder, but also as an advanced midfielder and a centre-forward. And the reason for this isn't that I think Chido Obi Martin or Kokonki could develop into central midfielders in the first team, but by being coached and playing in these different positions from time to time, for the under-18s, when the pressure is off and the stakes are low, they are going to develop certain abilities that they otherwise wouldn't if they were only playing as a centre-forward or as a centre-back. Chido Obi Martin being coached but also dropping in to play as a central midfielder on occasion may help him develop his technical ability in congested areas, whilst also giving him greater awareness of where a central midfielder needs a centre forward ahead to move into in order for them to play a pass or open up space for them to run into themselves, which in turn is going to give him a better understanding of how his movement as a centre forward helps the central midfielders behind him. And so it's not just about developing certain technical abilities, but also giving the players a better understanding of how the entire system operates. The second thing that I think players need to be coached in is physicality, aerial ability and athleticism. I think in the under-18s and under-21s, United need to be developing players with overall physicality, aerial ability and athleticism, because if you can improve each player just by 10% in each of those areas, the cumulative gain is going to be huge, and it's going to make a massive difference when they come into the first team. The game, particularly in the Premier League, is becoming more and more dependent on these 3 attributes, from centre-backs with pace to enable them to squeeze up the pitch, central midfielders with the athleticism to cover ground efficiently, either in the press or when trying to win loose balls, and midfielders and forwards inside of the box when it comes to being able to dominate and win aerial duels against defenders, as well as from set pieces in general. And if you can start young, then these players will have a few years of being able to develop these attributes, making them far better suited to Premier League football when they actually get to the first team, which is going to make them significantly better in these areas than if you just wait till they're playing senior football to try to develop these attributes. But the third one is mentality. Mentality is hugely important for young players, and there needs to be a culture at United of the training that you are required to do isn't enough on its own. Players need to know that if they are going to make it, they need to be improving in their own time. And for me, this should be pretty easy, even with first team players. Like surely with Rasmus Højlund, United should have a dedicated individual training session with him where they're pinging balls into his feet when he's under pressure and he has to control the ball and lay it off. I mean, he's been at the club a year and a half and he's actually got worse in this area. Individualised training sessions alongside players with the right mentality is what's going to allow United to develop more elite level players. So in conclusion, Manchester United is a club in need of redemption. It needs leaders who can think differently, who can see beyond the short term and build something enduring. And the modern day Socrates or Cruyff would be the perfect duo to lead this transformation. Socrates would restore the club's soul, reconnecting it with its values and community, whilst Cruyff would rebuild its identity, creating a team that plays with flair and intelligence. And together they would make Manchester United more than just a football club, which is definitely where the modern game seems to be dragging not just Manchester United, but a lot of other clubs into. And so for me the question isn't whether United can be fixed, but whether someone has the courage to embrace this kind of radical thinking that both Cruyff and Socrates represent. So let me know what you think of my analysis in the comment section below, and if you want to check out any cheap, good quality football jerseys, go over to okjersey.com. You can use code ATLANTIS at checkout for a discount, so I'll leave it linked in the description and in the comment section below.